George Washington's home, Mount Vernon, it's so much more than just a historic house sitting on the banks of the Potomac. It's really a key to understanding the man himself, his ambitions, his limitations, and, yeah, the huge contradictions at the very heart of his life and the nation he helped create.
Okay, so let's just dive right into this question, because the answer is fascinating. You'd think, right? One of the richest men in America. You're probably picturing some kind of massive European-style palace. But that's not what you see at Mount Vernon. And figuring out why is the key to understanding a whole lot about 18th century America.
So, to really get to the bottom of this, we have to look at the house not just as a place where he lived, but as a symbol of all these competing forces that were shaping Washington's entire world. And that's exactly it. I mean, it's a big, impressive home, for sure, but it doesn't scream, "I'm the wealthiest man in the country," in the way a European duke's palace would have. This little visual mismatch, it's our first big clue that wealth and status just meant something totally different in the American colonies. So let's talk about the social ladder of the time, because it's a huge piece of the puzzle. Washington and guys like him and the Virginia gentry, yeah, they were at the top. But the top of what exactly?
So, what did it even mean to be elite in a society that was still pretty new? Well, this chart just lays it out perfectly. There was a huge difference. Washington and the colonial elite, sure, they were rich by American standards. But back in England, they were seen as minor gentry. We're talking a whole different universe from the centuries of inherited wealth and power of the English aristocracy. Their biggest aspiration was to be seen as a gentleman, which was actually the lowest rung on the English nobility ladder. And you can literally see this ambition in the way the house itself grew. It wasn't just built all at once. Nope. It started as this pretty modest farmhouse his dad built. Then, as Washington's own status started to rise, he kept adding to it, piece by piece, over decades. Each addition was like a new chapter in his own story. And this, right here, this is the absolute key to the whole paradox. Washington was what you'd call land rich, but cash poor. All his wealth was tied up in his land, and, as we're about to see, in the people he enslaved. This meant he almost never had a lot of actual money on hand. I mean, get this, he actually had to borrow money just to travel to his own presidential inauguration. So a grand European-style palace? Yeah, that was just never gonna happen. But we have to be really clear about something. All of this, the land, the wealth, the house, the ambition, it was all powered by a system of forced labor. To really, truly understand Mount Vernon, we have to look at its human engine. 317. Just let that number sink in. In 1799, the year Washington died, that was the number of enslaved men, women, and children living and working across the 5 farms that made up the Mount Vernon estate. Because you see, Mount Vernon wasn't just a house with a big garden. It was a plantation, a massive, sprawling enterprise. It was more like a self-sufficient village, where the food, the clothing, even the bricks for the buildings, everything depended on the skills and the relentless, forced labor of the enslaved community. But, and this is so important to understand, even in the face of this unimaginable hardship, the enslaved community at Mount Vernon created a world of their own. They built families, they held on to their traditions, they found ways, big and small, to resist the system that tried to crush them. Their story isn't just a small part of Mount Vernon's story, it is the very foundation the whole place was built on. That's how the historian Henry Wiensek described the incredible research done by Mary V. Thompson, which has been so essential in telling the full story of Mount Vernon. It's just a powerful reminder that history is made up of every single life that was lived, not just the ones who got to write it down. Now, something started to shift in Washington himself over the years, especially after the Revolutionary War. His private letters show this growing unease with slavery. He even called it the only unavoidable subject of regret. And that led to his will. In it, he did something that no other slaveholding founding father did. He decided to free the people he enslaved. But like everything else with Mount Vernon, it's complicated. It's not a simple story.
And here's where it gets incredibly difficult and honestly tragic. You see, of those 317 people, Washington only had the legal power to free the 123 he owned himself. The other 153 were known as dower slaves. They were technically part of the estate of Martha's first husband, which meant Washington legally couldn't free them. They would be passed down to Martha's heirs.
So the will said that his slaves would be freed when Martha died, but she actually went ahead and did it early on New Year's Day, 1801. Now, while this was this incredible moment of freedom for 123 people, it was also a moment of absolute heartbreak. Because families had intermarried between the two groups, this act of freedom also permanently ripped families apart. So after the Washingtons were gone, what happened to the estate? Well, it faced a really uncertain future. It started to fall into decline, passed down through heirs who just didn't have the money to keep it up.
I mean, Mount Vernon was literally on the brink of ruin, about to be lost to history. But then, this incredible group of women stepped in and formed the Mount Vernon Ladies Association. They raised a mind-boggling amount of money, $200,000, which is millions today, to buy the estate and start the long, hard work of saving it. It was one of the very first and most important historic preservation projects in American history.
And get this, that's still how it works today. Mount Vernon is privately owned and operated by that same association, with no regular government money. This amazing act of preservation saved the home, but it also kind of froze in time that central paradox, a national shrine to liberty that was built by enslaved hands.
And that really is the question the House asks us today, isn't it? It stands as a landmark of the American dream, but it's also a monument to America's deepest, most painful contradiction. Figuring out how we remember and honor both sides of that story, the gentleman's ambition and the plantation's engine, that's the ongoing work of understanding not just Mount Vernon, but America itself.